evening and welcome to this public forum with the candidates for the North Dakota Legislative District 35. I am Robin Thorstensen with the League of Women Voters and I'll be your moderator. This candidate forum has been organized by the League of Women Voters of Bismarck-Mandan and Dakota Media Access. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes the informed participation of all citizens in their government. The League does not endorse nor oppose candidates or political parties. There are 4 candidates running for election for 2 open seats for the House of Representatives of District 35, and all 4 candidates are here tonight. They are Joe Ellsbury, Karen Carls, Bob Martinson, and Rachel Thomason. The audience here tonight, Wednesday, October 17th, is invited to submit questions on the index cards provided by the volunteers, and viewers and listeners may phone or text in questions for the candidates. The number to call is 701-355-1312 or text LWV 18527 to 22333. This is intended to be a respectful exchange of ideas. Our purpose this evening is to provide voters with information about the candidates and their positions on issues that affect the people of North Dakota. Now let's meet our candidates. You each have 1 minute to tell us why you are seeking election to the District 35 House of Representatives. We will begin with Bob Martinson.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'm a North Dakota Swede, and those of you that know people of Scandinavian ancestry know that we don't like to talk about ourselves, and we never brag. And so this is always the most difficult part of a forum for me. So I'm going to try to just stick with the facts of the matter. I'm running because I think it's very important that we have a strong voice in the legislature next session. We have a large number of state employees in our district. We have a large number of teachers and people that work for the Bismarck School District. Karen and I have a strong voice in the legislature. Not only are we in the room when the difficult decisions are made, but we're at the table helping make those difficult decisions, and I think that that experience is important.
Thank you. Karen Carls.
Hi, I'm Representative Karen Carls. I'm grateful to the voters of District 35 for electing me to serve our district in the legislature. I believe North Dakota is moving in the right direction and we want to keep it that way. As our state has grown and prospered, we've faced challenges, and by working together we've made progress. And I want to continue the job we've started. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Ellsbury.
My name is Joe Ellsbury. I live in the Highland Acres neighborhood with my wife Betsy and my 2 boys, Jack and Luke. Betsy and I both grew up in Minot. We've known each other since we were kids. Went to school at UND in Grand Forks, and now we moved to Bismarck about a dozen years ago to start our family. I work at the Great Plains Food Bank. We have the state's only food bank. We have food pantries in every county in North Dakota. Our mission is pretty simple. It's to end hunger in North Dakota. So that's who I am, and that's what I do for a living. The reason I'm here today is because I can listen. I'm running because if you've emailed your legislator and they haven't emailed you back, they're not listening to you. If your legislators aren't holding town halls, they're probably not listening to you. And if your legislators aren't knocking on your doors, chances are they're probably not hearing you. And so throughout this campaign, I've answered every email, returned every phone call. And this is what I've been hearing. People in District 35 care about protecting our neighborhood schools and stabilizing our economy. And that's exactly what I'll do if I'm elected. Thank you.
Rachel Thomason.
First of all, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event, and thank you to all in attendance. I'm Rachel Thomason, and I'm running for the North Dakota House of Representatives for several reasons, not the least of which is to ensure the viability of our children's education. Last fall, shortly after my oldest son started kindergarten at Roosevelt Elementary, we heard that his school may be closing. When I discovered that its closing was partially a result of budget pressures at the state level, and knowing what that school meant to him and other families, I decided it was time to get to work. I'm also running because I see a need to strengthen our district's connections to its legislators. I've now knocked on thousands of doors, and I'm continually surprised when folks tell me that they've never had a House candidate knock on their door before. As candidates and legislators, if we don't make a real effort to reach out to the community during campaign season, how will our constituents trust that we're listening during session? I look forward to representing you, and thank you for your vote November 6th.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the questions developed by the members of the League of Women Voters, our in-house audience, and viewers at home. For our audience here, to submit a question, please use the index cards provided. Viewers may submit questions tonight, Wednesday, October 17th, by phone at 701-355-1312 or by texting LWV 18527 to 22333. Candidates have not been given questions in advance, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question. After 3 candidates' responses, we will move on to the next question. Please comply with our time restrictions so we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. Our timer will let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, then stop. So let's begin. And our first respondent will be Ms. Carls. And our first question is, how would you address funding for infrastructure for municipalities outside the oil patch?
Oh, that's a very good question. We're working on a bill right now that would address infrastructure needs for the non-oil producing counties. Last session, we spent a lot of money in the oil country because their roads were in such bad condition. And so we heard from a lot of political subdivisions, basically, that they were crying for help with their roads and their bridges and things like that. So some Republican legislators have come up with a plan. It has been vetted by an interim committee and will be vetted over and over again by the legislature until it's fine-tuned. And it will provide money to local cities and counties for roads, basically.
Thank you. Mr. Ellsbury, same question.
Thanks, Robin. The thing with infrastructure is I support infrastructure projects, but they cost a lot of money to maintain as well. And if your economy's not growing underneath that infrastructure, we're creating a real burden for ourselves down the road. And so we really need to address the main issue is our workforce shortage. We need to fill up our empty jobs and fill up our empty homes in Bismarck right now. And I think the best way to do that is to focus on things like education and childcare. Because if we're not filling these jobs and growing our economy and our local economies, we're not going to be able to afford this infrastructure maintenance down the road. So I would rather see a focus on our problems that we have right now, and that is, I mean, we have a serious workforce shortage, we have a teacher shortage, we have a nursing shortage, and childcare is simply unaffordable for the typical working class family. And so I would rather have those issues solved first and then worry about infrastructure later.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Thomason, same question.
I would certainly agree that we have infrastructure needs in North Dakota that need to be taken care of. I'm in agreement with my colleague Joe Ellsbury that we need to be taking a look at a combination of things that need our attention. It's been proposed now that we have oil monies going to infrastructure in the state. That's kind of we're looking at a volatile issue to go into infrastructure at this point. I'd like to see varying interests, varying investments going into our infrastructure rather than just relying on that one volatile issue.
Thank you. So our next question will begin with Mr. Ellsbury, and that is, what is your assessment of the funding of the North Dakota University system?
Well, every day I drop my kids off for school. I drive through Bismarck State College, and I love that college. Everyone in Bismarck loves that college, and I'm really concerned with our funding issues. We've been slashing their budgets, and I'm really concerned because, especially if BSC is a perfect example of public and private partnership, where we provide public funding, but private companies do a ton of donating to BSC. So our people, our graduates, are ready for their jobs, and we cannot afford to keep slashing the budgets for BSC. I would not support any budget cuts any longer. A lot of their employees live in our district, and I knock on their doors, and they are worried about their jobs. And young people don't want to work there either because they don't know if their job's going to be there in a couple of years. So I think increasing funding for BSC and higher ed is an investment in our future. And so I think we really need to stem the tide. We need to stop slashing funding, especially when it comes to Bismarck State College.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson, same question.
I am concerned about the 20% budget cut at the higher ed level. What this does is puts more burden on the students because tuition is going to raise. It's going to rise so that it covers the rest that's not covered by the state, and that financial burden then is on the backs of students. They're going to have to cover that through additional student loans. Many students already have crippling financial debt, and we just can't continue to put that burden on the backs of students.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
Well, the big three in North Dakota are secondary and elementary, which receives about 35% of our budget. Higher education receives about 15%, and human services is 30%. So that's 80% of the budget right there. The cuts that we made in higher education 2 years ago were very difficult. They were very painful, and I can pretty much assure you that higher education won't be cut again. K-12 won't be cut, and human services won't be cut. The difficult job is to go through each budget detail by detail, all the other budgets, to see where we can come up with shortfalls that we will probably have. But higher ed, in my opinion, won't receive any more cuts.
Thank you. We had a follow-up question that came in from one of our viewers, and that is, how would you make decisions on which programs are critical to the state? Ms. Carls, we'll start with you. How would you make decisions on which programs are critical to the state, given budget cuts?
Well, our main task always is to balance the budget without raising taxes. Our important issues will always be human services. That's enormous. Education also. We've held K through 12 harmless. We're now funding 70 to 80% with about a 20% local match. Let's see, other issues, education, the opioid crisis. We're doing the Justice Reinvestment Program to try and stem the misuse of opioids, and there's a behavioral health piece in that too, and behavioral health will be a huge issue in this next session.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ellsbury.
Can you give me that one more time?
Of course. How would you make decisions on which programs are critical to the state, given these budget cuts?
Yeah, so, when I moved to Bismarck, I got a master's degree in special ed. You learn a lot about research and evidence-based analysis. And our legislature does not do a good job of doing a cost-benefit analysis to anything. We don't really look at the return on investment. So when it comes to cuts, we have two of the best research institutions in the country in our borders, in NDSU and UND. I would love to see them dig into our government and find out which programs can be cut, which programs need to be expanded, and which programs need to be eliminated. And right now, it's just based on, we don't put a lot of thought and effort into it. And so right now, when we have a budget issue, we do across-the-board cuts. And that causes a lot of damage to our state that we're going to end up paying those bills, for years down the road. So really, I would like to lean on our research institutions, lean on the people that live within our borders, that know what they're talking about, and find out how can we best make the budget cuts that go the longest, that get a return on investment.
Thank you. Ms. Thomason.
I think we need to look at what needs we have in our workforce and look to see what institutions provide for those needs. So we're looking at priorities here. When I was an adjunct English professor at BSc, most of my students in that middle skills gap, having more than a high school diploma but less than a 4-year degree, they're learning trades. A lot of my students said that they were going to be working in plants. And so there's a workforce gap in North Dakota where we need folks to fill those positions. And so if we look at what our workforce needs, then I think the question naturally will be answered as to what programs should be looking at first.
Thank you. Our next question, we will actually start with Mr. Ellsbury to keep our sequence going, and that is, how would you grade the state of North Dakota's rollout of medical marijuana?
Oh, well, this is a passionate issue in District 35. I would grade it as very, very low, unfortunately, because people of District 35, we're very adamant. We supported this measure overwhelmingly, and they thought it was going to happen right away. I've had people literally in tears on the doors talking about this issue. I had a woman talk to me. She was crying, and her granddaughter has brain cancer, and she goes to school at Moorhead State, and she was getting sicker, and she wants to move into her family's basement in Fargo, and the choice is either give up her medication or become a criminal. And this woman is crying, and she said she reached out to her legislators, and she felt that they didn't take her seriously, and she'd been contacting them as the rollout is going on now to 2 years. And so the grade is basically enough. This issue was ignored by the legislature for many, many years. And when the people spoke and did it themselves, it should have been passed as written right away. If there's problems with it, then that's too bad. You know, if lawmakers wanted a law written, they could have written it themselves. Thank you.
Ms. Thomason.
I would agree with Mr. Ellsbury that at the doors, voters have been extremely frustrated with the way medical marijuana was handled. When that issue arose 2 years ago and the state of North Dakota voted in a majority to approve that measure, our current leadership had an opportunity to study legalization and taxation of marijuana, but they voted against that study. They didn't even want to have the conversation. And now we're in a position of seeing Measure 3 on the ballot. And I believe in direct response to what happened with medical marijuana issue. If voters pass Measure 3, I foresee that a considerable amount of taxation and regulation will need to occur. But if the voters vote, we need to act.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
I think it's pathetic, the rollout of the medical marijuana. I'm embarrassed by it. I'm disgusted by it. I don't see any reason why it's taken the time that it has. Just to make a comment on what you said about that we didn't act last session. Had we not acted last session, the bill was so poorly written, it didn't legalize the possession of medical marijuana. It would have been illegal to have medical marijuana. But I think it's disgustingly pathetic that it's taken it's taken 2 years. It was 2 years ago that the voters passed it, and I think it's inexcusable.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another question, and we'll begin with Ms. Thomason. The question that came in from one of our viewers is, how does the buyout of more than 200 state employees impact District 35 and the delivery of services to all of our state's residents?
I'm sorry. Sure. Robin, could you rephrase
Definitely.
the question?
It's a prolonged question, definitely.
Thank you.
How does the buyout of more than 200 state employees, impact District 35 and the delivery of services to all of our state's residents?
You know, at the doors, I have talked to more state employees than I can count. As an attorney with a guardianship focus, I work with many, many state employees at the Department of Human Service level. And with the cuts to their employment, they're short-staffed, they feel underpaid. Many are working more than 40 hours a week doing a state job that they're paid 40 hours for. And so it's been incredibly frustrating for them. And of course, this has an impact on the rest of our state. It's not serving us well.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
I've never been a particular fan of buyouts. Basically, what buyouts do is the attempt is made to replace an older long-term employee who is at a higher level with somebody just entering the job market. And it's very hard to determine if there's any actual savings in that. But it doesn't really, the only way that it really affects the delivery of services is you're taking an older experienced worker and replacing them that will take with a younger person that will take them a little time longer to get up to speed. But we aren't eliminating those jobs. We're just shifting the salary from a higher level to a lower level.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Carls, your response to the same question. How does the buyout of more than 200 state employees impact District 35 and the delivery of services to all state residents?
Well, I agree with Bob. And furthermore, these were voluntary buyouts. So people chose this plan. And I guess we'll have to see how it will affect services. But the assumption is that they will be replaced by younger workers that will fill in.
Okay, thank you.
And could I address something else?
Of course.
You know, the implication has been that we don't do doors in our campaign. I've done door knocking on all of my campaigns. And the fact that a lot of state employees are talked to, I talked to them also. I had 3 of them ask me, what are you going to do for state employees at their door? And I've had one person, and I've done almost close to 4,000 doors this time, ask me about the marijuana. One.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Let's move on to another question, and Ms. Thomason, you'll begin. And that question is, do you believe in using the principal of the legacy fund or just the earnings of the legacy fund, and why?
I think what the voters need to know about the legacy fund is that it contains approximately $6 billion. And the name itself suggests to the voters, this is our legacy fund. What do we want North Dakota's legacy to be? I do agree with spending the interest in the legacy fund now, but I think the legislators need to have a very serious discussion with each other and with their constituents to decide, how big does that legacy fund get? What are we looking for? Are we looking for $10 billion, $12 billion, $20 billion? And what did the voters agree North Dakota's legacy should be? What will that money eventually go to? What's important to us?
Thank you. Mr. Martinson. I'm
very, very opposed to using any of the principal in the legacy fund. The voters were very wise to establish the fund, and I'm just not going to vote to go into the principal. It's for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I do support using the interest. I support legacy projects. I hope that we don't use too much of the money to support general government, although that's a decent purpose, but I would like to see us do one-type projects that we can do, things like the Heritage Center. That's a legacy project. University of North Dakota Medical Center, that we built a brand new facility, which is actually quite beautiful. That's a legacy project. So I do not support using any of the principal. And as big as it can get is fine with me.
Thank you. Ms. Carls.
Thank you. Yes, there will be much discussion about that very issue in the upcoming session. I don't believe there's any support for touching the principal. That will remain. What the mission will be is to decide how to spend the interest that comes from that fund. And there will be tugs on that money from every direction in the state, so we just have to see what will happen.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Martinson.
Yes.
I have to figure out where we are in the rotation. So
I knew I was next.
I'm glad that you did. Thank you. And that next question is, what would be your priorities for improving behavioral health, including prevention and access to those services?
Well, I think that's become a very interesting topic and a very important topic. We need to properly fund mental health. I was with the legislature. I voted for, and we worked for years to get Blue Cross and Blue Shield to fund mental health programs as part of the health insurance program. So I think some of the problems facing people now with the drugs and alcohol are very serious and need to be addressed. And I think that's going to be we've had an interim committee study it. They have some suggestions on what we should do next session, and that will be a very important topic.
Thank you. Ms. Carls?
Thank you. Yes, I served on the interim health services committee, and a big part of that was the behavioral health issue. We started by touring the state school at Grafton, interestingly enough, and they are starting to do a lot more in that area in the form of crisis intervention. We heard about programs from all around the state that want to address this issue. Pam Sagnas with the Health Department, or maybe Department of Human Services, is doing an amazing job organizing the many, many facets of this issue. And the First Lady's program, the programs that they put on that the people are invited to are just amazing. You learn so much, and we will be definitely addressing a lot of that in the next session.
Thank you. Mr. Ellsbury.
Thanks, Robin. I've spoken to a lot of teachers and a lot of cops in my neighborhood about this, and they universally agree or think that the burden of behavioral health is too much of it has been put on our teachers and our police officers. Even through my work at the Great Plains Food Bank, a lot of our homeless population, they're out there because of their behavioral health. And our schools, like right now, our neighborhood schools in District 35 are struggling to keep their doors open, so they can't focus on extra things like trying new behavioral health interventions, which we need to. Because if we don't take care of it early, if we let these problems go longer, it's bad for us as a society, as a culture, but also financially. When someone gets more and more unhealthy as they progress, we pay for it in the long run. And so I would support, we need to fully fund our education, not just held harmless. They need to have some wiggle room to work on these behavioral health issues. It's a major deal. People talk about it each and every night. And so really, we need to take the burden off our police officers and our teachers, and our legislature needs to step up and give them real valid supports that they can use.
Thank you. Again, we invite our in-house audience to submit questions using the index cards provided, and viewers may call 701-355-1312 or text LWV 1-85272-22333 during our forum tonight, Wednesday, October 17th. So let's move on to our next question, and Ms. Carls, you'll have first response. And that is, what type of early childhood investments should be made in North Dakota? And this was a texted-in request.
Well, we have been spending a lot of money on studying the different options. To this point, the budget is going to be a big part of what will determine what we can afford. We have a lot of legislation dealing with daycare issues. We have after-school program issues, and we can't fund everything, unfortunately, but we do what we can. And as far as the funding of schools, if we get to 80%, there's still a 20% skin in the game that the communities must provide. And that, I think, is something we need to continue.
Thank you. Mr. Ellsbury.
Early childhood is very, very important to me. As I said, I've worked in early childhood special ed for many years and have a master's degree in early childhood. The child care situation, it is, and I don't use this word lightly, it's a crisis. It costs $16,000 a year to put a kid through child care right now in North Dakota. The typical family in District 35 makes $60,000 a year. So you can do the math. So people have to choose between having a kid or buying a home or having a second child. They just can't afford it. There's just numbers come into play. And we don't have any type of public early childhood program. And these are, when people are looking to fill these positions in North Dakota, they're looking at stuff like that. They're Googling how much is child care, what type of early childhood programs do they have in my neighborhood. And the answer to that is they don't exist. And so if we're serious about fixing our workforce shortage, and if we're serious about filling these empty jobs and filling up these empty homes that are popping up all over Bismarck, we're going to have to get serious about early childhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Thomason.
I'm absolutely in favor of holding our legislature to its promise to fund 70 to 80% of K through 12 education. I'm also passionate about the child care issue because it's a personal experience for me, and it's one that many folks at the doors have been frustrated about and have talked to me about. One of these major issues is the families have on their shoulders the burden of rising child care costs. Many parents can't enter the workforce because daycare is simply too expensive, so they stay at home with their children instead. Others have told me that they have wanted more children, but simply don't because they can't afford to have more children, and this is heartbreaking. If we are sending folks in, if we want to send folks into the workforce, we can't be burdening them with extreme child care costs. And from personal experience, I can tell you that having just 2 children in daycare costs as much or more than a mortgage. And this, for the average family, is just too much.
Thank you. Our next question, Mr. Ellsbury, you will have first response, and it is, do you see a need for voter registration? Why or why not?
I don't. I love well, I did. We had voter laws that worked just fine from about the 50s until a couple years ago. It worked great. We had good laws in the books. It was illegal to vote illegally, and if we would just enforce the laws that we had, I think we'd be all better off. Our legislator intervened and started passing laws. And I think it's created a ton of problems. All the money that we've spent fighting this in the court systems, all of the drama, and frankly, bad feelings. Like, people on our tribal brothers and sisters feel very slighted right now. They feel like our legislature is picking on them. Whether that's true or not, that's debatable. But we made it harder for them to vote. That's a fact. And we had laws in the books that worked. It was always illegal to vote. Voter fraud was always illegal. We should have spent that money enforcing that law rather than writing new ones. And this is going to go on for years and years. And we're going to fight this every election. This law is going to turn out back up in the court systems again. So I do not. I support going back. We had our voter laws worked fine until about 2014. I would love to go back to that because it worked since the 50s until then, and just start over and stick with what we know what works.
Thank you. Ms. Thomason.
I would hope that it's a nonpartisan issue, that everyone at this table would appreciate more folks going to the polls. We want to encourage accessibility to the polls, not limit where or how people should be voting. And I too have concerns about the Native population. It has a tendency, or I fear it will have a tendency, to harm their voting numbers, as many rely on P.O. boxes rather than physical addresses for voting purposes. So this is an issue I'm concerned about. And I agree with Mr. Ellsbury that North Dakota, without voter registration, was doing great.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
Well, I have a little bit of a different opinion. I'm not so sure that voter registration wouldn't be the thing to do. It has come up from time to time in the legislature, but generally speaking, it's been the rural legislators who have opposed voter registration. So if we had voter registration and we crafted it so that the tribes could register their own voters, if the tribes are responsible to make sure that that the people are members of, live in the district that they talk about. I spent a lot of time working oil and gas on the reservation, 5 or 6 years, so I know that most of the folks have post office boxes. But if we had the tribes determine the residency of each enrolled member who lives on the reservation, it might be the solution to the problem with very little impact.
Thank you. Our next question, Ms. Thomason, you'll be able to have first response, and that is, are there opportunities to improve relationships between political subdivisions? And please share your ideas around that.
I believe there's always the opportunity to improve relationships between anyone. It's simply just a matter of talking, figuring out what our divisiveness is, and coming to a compromise. Talking to each other is always the answer, and seeing what we have in common.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
I'm not so sure I fully understand the question. I guess I didn't realize there was a problem. We meet with the city people all the time. We meet with county people, and if there's a problem with communication between the cities and the counties, at least for us, I'm not aware of it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Carls.
Yes, that is an interesting question. A good example of what Bob said was the issues concerning enforcement along the Missouri River. We had a big issue a few years ago of littering and vandalism and speeding boats and drunken driving, and the Game and Fish people formed a task force, and they literally had to bring so many bodies together: the Morton County Sheriff, the Mandan Police, the Burleigh County Sheriff, Bismarck Police, the legislature, the Corps of Engineers, the Water Commission, and they had a series of meetings and came up with a wonderful plan to, 2 boats were supplied. It was manned by law enforcement from either side of the river. They took turns. It was a voluntary thing, but they found the money to pay for this, and it worked great.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'd like to invite our in-house audience to submit questions using the index cards provided, and viewers may call 701-355-1312 or text LWV 18527 to 333. So we will continue with our next question, and Mr. Martinson, you get to lead off. I have a little bit of an opening explanation of the question, and that is civil forfeiture allows police to seize property that was involved in a crime. Are there any pluses or minuses to civil forfeiture law, and are there any changes or clarifications you'd like to see implemented?
Your questions they're interesting, and some of them are more difficult than others. In this case, I do believe in civil forfeiture, but if a person is found innocent and they're not convicted, their property should be returned to them.
Okay.
I don't believe that you should take property from innocent people.
Thank you. Ms. Carls?
Yes, I totally agree. The whole way this started was the theory is you don't want a person to benefit from the fruits of their crime. And that is why cars were confiscated, guns were confiscated if you were caught hunting without a license, for instance. And there have been cases where innocent people's property was confiscated. Now, the money from that confiscation goes into the county's general fund or whatever the jurisdiction is that confiscated it. Now, if there's federally illegal drugs involved, then they take part of that money also. But yes, I agree that if you are innocent, your property should be returned.
Thank you. Mr. Ellsbury?
Robin, I'd like to touch real quick on that last question about communicating with political subdivisions, because it's really the reason I'm here. Through the whole year of 2017, when our neighborhood schools were closing, we filled up this actual room, and the school board was here, and it was hundreds of parents, administrators, teachers sitting in these chairs. And we made them analyze every line of their school budget that say, why are these schools closing? And these school board members were frustrated with us, but they respected us and respected that we were involved. And I remember when it was all said and done and we saved the schools for one more year, they looked right at us and said, you guys love coming in here and giving us grief, but where are your legislators? Your legislators are the one who set this budget. Then they go home for 2 years and we get to fix it. And so that's, I think, where the communication is. Whether that's right or wrong, that's a debate. But they don't feel, and I wouldn't be surprised if that question came from a school board member, they don't feel like there's a communication, and that's something, if I'm elected, I'm going to work directly with our school board members to make sure if I made a decision at the legislature that's going to harm them or help them, I want to explain myself so they know where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Carls. If Measure 1 is adopted and you are elected, what measures or activities would you put forward in place to move it forward? So if Measure 1 is adopted and you're elected, what would you do to help move it forward?
Well, since I totally don't support that measure, it would be, it's an interesting question. We wouldn't have a choice, and this is foisted upon us by some out-of-state group that's funding it. I looked to South Dakota, and they had a similar measure, and it was just created an upheaval in South Dakota, and they unanimously threw it out. And so our legislature looked at this and said, what can we do to preempt this and not cause this to happen to our state? So we had quite a lengthy bill last session in the Government and Veterans Affairs Committee I'm a member of that addressed financial disclosure, transparency, basically doing all the things that we need to do to give the people the financial disclosure information they're looking for. So I guess my time's up.
Thank you, Ms. Carls. Mr. Ellsbury.
This is a perfect example of what, like, a change that I would bring to these House spots. So I've read this measure, and if it passed, it'll have a significant impact on our government. And it's going to cost a lot of money, too, that we'll have to appropriate. And this is where our representatives need to be out talking to the people. I would hold a listening session in all 6 precincts of our district. And because people need to know, we're going to have to spend some money on this, and I want the people of District 35 to approve of it. I want their opinions. And maybe they have regrets. If they voted for it and they regret it, maybe I can make some changes. If they vote for it overwhelmingly, support this measure, let's say they vote for it 70% or 80% in favor, then I better just be following their language. It depends on how the district votes on it, but it really comes down to respecting the people. Like with medical cannabis, it was passed overwhelmingly in our district, in the high 70s, mid 70s, and the legislature tore it apart, especially in the House. And people are still really, really upset about it. And so if Measure 1 passes, and it's in that 70-80% range like the other ones, I need to honor the language of that bill and get out to the people and let them know what I'm up to.
And Ms. Thomason.
Now, this issue never should have really been needed to be on this ballot because the people have been requesting this type of oversight for years. They wanted better oversight of the ethics of our legislators. And it can be framed in such a way that we have already taken these measures to do this. But the people of North Dakota saw an additional need. They saw the need for this measure. And so here it is, it's in front of us. I don't think it is helpful to say that we already have these measures in place, so therefore we don't have an ethics problem. The people of North Dakota may disagree if they have decided that this measure is appropriate. And so an adage of Ronald Reagan is trust but verify. And I think we need to work with our voters to decide how we're going to implement this while, yes, as Mr. Ellsbury said, making sure that they know what the cost will be.
Thank you. And this will be our last question, and Mr. Ellsbury will be kicking it off.
Okay.
And the last question is, how does public health support the health and well-being of our workforce?
It's vital. Again, everyone's well aware. Every campaign I've listened to this year talks about a workforce shortage, right? And public health is a key issue for that. When people look to move into a neighborhood and to a town, they're checking out their hospitals, especially in the rural areas. So my mother-in-law lives in Garrison. The whole town revolves around its hospital. The base floor is an emergency room. The middle floor is a hospital. The upstairs is a nursing home. It is key to that community. And things that have happened in our legislature have put the future of that hospital in question. The way we keep messing around with Medicaid reimbursements to salvage our budget issues. Well, this might look good in Bismarck, but it could close a hospital down in a city like Garrison and cripple their entire economy and put these people out in the streets, literally. And so I think we need to have a really we need to be looking at from a workforce shortage perspective. What do people want to see from a neighborhood as far as health goals and health outcomes, and meet those needs? Thank you.
Ms. Thomason.
I would agree with Mr. Ellsbury that public health is an absolute necessity. In my work as a guardianship attorney, many of the vulnerable adults that I see, that I help get guardianships for, rely on public health for their everyday medical needs. If we have a workforce shortage in public health, if we have a shortage in public health period, that not only affects those vulnerable adults, it affects the rest of us, because we need to somehow decide how we're going to be assisting those individuals. We've got to pick up that slack.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the fact that when you gave us the rules, you said that we could go back and do a little responding. Mm-hmm. So I want to respond to two things. Measure number one is a constitutional issue. If that passes, you will not make changes in the legislative process. The only way a constitutional measure can be changed is by a vote of the voters. And secondly, with regarding to local schools, I went to Wilmore, Hughes, and Bismarck High School. I had 3 stepdaughters that went to Highland Acres School. Highland Acres is a beautiful school. I support local schools, neighborhood schools. When I was told that there was a problem with a couple of the schools, that I called school board members and asked them what the problem was. And what I was told was that the superintendent spoke out of school, pun intended, and she's no longer with us. It's my opinion that there was never an intention to close those schools, which is what I heard from the school board members.
Thank you. And at this time, we are going to move to closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to give a closing statement, and we will make sure that every candidate has that 1 minute. And we will begin with Ms. Thomason.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you again to the League of Women Voters, and thank you to my colleagues for the opportunity to have these important discussions today. North Dakota's an amazing place. I grew up here, I attended high school here, I attended undergraduate and law school here, and I started raising my family in Bismarck. In law school, yes, I lived and worked in other areas. I went to Oslo to take classes in Norway. I've also lived and worked for a short time in New York City, but North Dakota is always the place that I came back to. But for all of North Dakota's strengths as legislators, we can't allow ourselves to be complacent. Our financial situation is now putting pressures on our schools, and a strong education is the driving force of our economy and our children's futures here. As a legislator, that would be my first priority. I also vow to be available to the voters, not just during campaign season and not just during session, but throughout the year, because you should know who your legislators are and you should feel like they're accessible. I'm excited to work for you, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Martinson.
Thank you. We work very hard for state employees. We need to work very hard to protect their benefits, to properly fund education, and things that we've already talked about tonight. So I would just kind of like to end with a little bit of an analogy. And that's that if you're going to have heart surgery, you're going to have open heart surgery, or if you're going to have delicate brain surgery, would you rather have somebody that's had years of experience, that has a reputation for doing a good job, and that you're very comfortable with knowing how they will act in the operating room? Or would you rather have a person who just graduated from medical school that looks at you and says, you know, I've always wanted to try that? So I would appreciate your vote, and I would look forward to your support on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Carls.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Robin. You are a treasure.
Thank you.
You have put us so much at ease. And going back to one question before I do my closing remarks about the high cost of daycare. We haven't addressed long-term care at all tonight, and I'm sorry about that. But my parents are in a nursing home, and it's costing them $15,000 a month. And that is really a tough pill to swallow. But I want to thank you for this opportunity to address the voters of District 35. I've been honored to serve you. Our common goal is to keep North Dakota a great place to live, work, and raise our families for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ellsbury.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. You did the whole District 35 team. I just watched yours last night. It was great to have you. This is great. I love what the League of Women Voters does. This is how I find out about my candidates every election, whether it be for legislature or statewide races. I love it. I want to talk real quick and just let people know, on TV that are here and on KDAC, one of the advantages of electing someone who's never ran for office before. This is my first time running. I've never been involved with either political party whatsoever. I don't owe anything to anyone. I don't have to listen to any party leaders. I don't have to listen to any longtime donors. The only people I have to listen to are the folks that live in the boundaries of District 35. And I'm really excited for that. I'm excited to give you guys an opportunity to participate directly in your state government. And I'm just excited in general because I think it's time for a change. And if that's something that you agree with and something you're excited about, I'd appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our candidates for being here tonight and for sharing their views. I wish to also thank Dakota Media Access and the volunteers from the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. Thank you to the viewers at home and the audience members here tonight for taking the time to learn more about the candidates and the issues. This program will replay several times on Government Access Cable Channel 2 and 602 HD and will be available for online viewing at www.freetv.org in the days leading up to the November 6th election. Before we close this candidate forum, we remind you that you will need a form of identification to vote in North Dakota. You can find identification requirements and additional voting information on the websites or at the offices of your county auditor and the North Dakota Secretary of State. Thank you and good night.